So this is a special webinar we have here. My friend Jers from The Way of Jers, or The Jers Way, depending on if you go to the website or you go to the Twitter. He's an expert on global arbitrage and sovereignty. He has helped me personally reduce my tax burden. I'm about to get my Panama residency, but also he helped me open a Panama account, a bunch of things that have helped me offset, a lot of the tax burden that I have. So since he partnered with us, giving you guys, everybody in the job stacking community, 25-30% off his services. I just thought let him explain what his services are. So I'll leave it to him. The floor is yours.
Sounds good. So I'll just do a little introduction for everybody. So what I really help people do is internationalize, set up residencies, and most importantly, in a lot of cases, is reduce tax burden. I do that both by setting up something called a tax residency, which I'll get to in a minute, but more than anything, it's business structures and banking and all that good stuff. From what I know about the community, most of you are working remotely. So you have the flexibility to work from anywhere. So a lot of our clients are people just like you doing the same kind of thing. And by relocating, by changing your structures, you can greatly reduce your tax burden. First, I think the most important thing is probably the business structure for you guys. A lot of you probably get remote jobs, not as a company, but directly as a person. And a lot of times, once you have those remote jobs, it's actually not only in your interest, it's in the company's best interest for you to switch from an employee to a contractor. And that gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes to taxation, when it comes to expenses you can write off, and also to sort of get you out of tax systems and registered in a place where you can greatly reduce your tax burden. But regardless, for a lot of you, whether you're American, whether you're Canadian, European, really the best business structure to set up your company is a US LLC. The structure itself is very simple, it's fast to set up, and it's extremely inexpensive. Setting up the LLC gives you access to things like US banking for the non-US people, potentially US credit. So there are a lot of advantages to doing it. But probably the biggest advantage is you no longer are going to have all of those things taken out of your paycheck for your remote job. So things like Social Security and whatnot, when you're getting paid into a company, you typically just get the full salary, and then you're responsible for paying your own deductions. So right there, it's a way to just get larger checks straight off the bat.
So this is better for contract jobs, like 1099, because if you're in the United States, a W-2, you kind of screws.
Exactly. But what I find a lot of times with my clients, people think, hey, I'm screwed. I'm a W-2. I'm an employer. Most of the time it's in the employer's interest to switch you to a contractor, to the 1099 status. So a lot of times employers are much more open to doing that than you think. And especially if you're a US citizen and you're hired as an employee, if you go to the employer and you say, hey, I've left the US, I'm not living in the US, can we switch the status of my employment from employee to a 1099 independent contractor? You'd be surprised. A lot of times they're very open to doing that. So then you're a 1099, you're working now as basically a self-employed person.
If you're not from the United States, the US LLC basically lets you operate and get contracts, get money from the United States.
And one thing, you'd know this better than I would, but I would think, there are a lot of US companies that maybe won't hire somebody who has a Canadian taxpayer.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
But it's going to open up the amount of remote jobs you can apply for.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to have a US tax number. So you are a US entity getting paid by a US entity.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, the more formal you can make it appear, if you could present as just you're doing business to business, B2B, it's almost like you're an agency presenting your resume, but it's just you. That's even better. It's kind of like levels of comfort. If you're just a foreigner and you think that you're going to send your resume to an American company and they're going to call you, no, they're very uncomfortable doing that. They won't do international contracts. Then the next level is if you're a US LLC, they're more open to it, right? But if you're just an individual fronting the LLC or the LLC fronting you, you have more opportunity, but there's still a level of discomfort. But then if you present as a B2B, this is a company that can place people in whatever role they need, they're even more comfortable. So jumping over to the benefit of the LLC for an American citizen is that I guess you decouple your taxes from your income.
If you're a U.S. citizen, the LLC is still more or less, in most cases, going to be taxed as personal income, but it allows you to take deductions and other things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. It does usually work out better for you to do it as an American through an LLC than it would through your Social Security number. The next big step for a lot of you is going to be to leave your tax system. So if you're non-American, that means you can literally go to your tax authority, go to Canada Revenue, go to Hacienda in Spain, whatever the case is, and you literally file a couple forms and you say, I'm no longer going to be a tax subject. And as part of that process, you have to say, okay, this is my new tax domicile. This is where I'm going. And in the Americas, generally the two best countries are going to be Panama and Paraguay. And between those two, in most cases, is going to be Paraguay. And the reason is you can set up a tax domicile in Paraguay without actually living inside the country. So you go there, the requirements are pretty simple. You just get a couple documents. And then once you have those documents, you come to Paraguay for a couple of days and you leave as a tax resident. You get a 2-year temporary residency. You have to go back for a couple of days in 2 years. You become a permanent resident, and then it's 1 day every 3 years. So really with a handful of days over a number of years, you become a tax resident and you leave your tax system. Now, what does that exactly mean? It means you're cutting your ties to that country. So like in the case of Canada, you can only spend a limited number of months in Canada every year. If you own a business or something like that, you're going to have to sell that business. You're going to have to liquidate it because you're basically liquidating your position in that country.
So I help my students this. You don't really feel the taxes when you're job stacking, it's just only like 2 jobs, 3 jobs. Once you scale past like 3 jobs, you realize like the system it's set up to make you fail. They take so much money. They take the ladder off. It's ridiculous. So I want to ask you, why is that important?
So basically, these countries, Paraguay, Panama, there are a couple others in Latin America. They're called territorial tax countries. And what that means is they only tax income earned inside that country. So if you go and work for a Paraguayan company, Panamanian company, you're going to pay tax in those countries at the tax rate. But working a remote job, or if you have income from another source that comes from a foreign country, it's taxed at a rate of 0. You still have to file tax returns, but literally at the bottom of the tax return, it'll say 0 tax owed because all your money comes from a US company. It comes from a Canadian company. It's coming from outside the country. So it's like a little legal trick to avoid paying tax simply by registering and becoming a legal tax resident in one of these territorial tax countries. It's like a legal cheat. This isn't gray area. This is 100% by the book, perfectly legal. Basically, it is just understanding the way international tax systems work and following the rules to sort of exploit and benefit in a legal way. And then the next question, so what happens if you're American? Because what I just mentioned will apply to every other country but the US. The US is a little bit different because you are taxed on your worldwide income, and you can't just go to the IRS and say, I no longer wish to be a taxpayer. What you can do, the US offers something called the foreign earned income exclusion. The amount changes, goes up a little bit every year. The current number is $130,000, and the IRS allows you, if you leave the US, to deduct your first $130,000 of income from your US taxes. It's not like 100% dollar per dollar deduction, but if you're making 100,000 plus, it's gonna save you significant amount of taxes in the tens of thousands by doing this. And the IRS uses 2 tests to determine, hey, is this something you can do? One is a physical presence test. For this, it means you have to only spend up to 35 days in the US. So if you spend more than that, you can't claim this deduction. But the second way to qualify, and it's an either or thing, is the bona fide resident test. So you can set up one of these residencies like in Paraguay, like in Panama, and that will allow you to claim this deduction. So it's not quite as good as it is for the Canadians or people from other countries, but it's still pretty good. Just think, you have these couple remote jobs, 2-3 remote jobs, and suddenly you're able to eliminate or greatly reduce the tax burden. It simply becomes another way to sort of stack money.
So then we do business in the US, we bank in Panama, we legally reside in Paraguay. What's the point?
So basically, once you leave the country, whatever country that is, the sort of final piece to this puzzle is, where do you bank? Because part of the process of leaving the system is to close most of your accounts, or at the very least to quit using and running all your money through a Canadian account, in the example of the Canadian. So the question is, where do you bank? There are different options around the world. We work with a lot of different banks, but one of the best in the Americas, probably the best, is Panama, because any money you run through there, assuming you have this setup in place, is not going to be taxed. And the information is not going to be reported back to whichever country you've left. So Panama is a low-cost jurisdiction for banking. The banks are very safe, they're reliable, they're easy to work with, they don't ask too many questions. It's a clean sort of finish to the setup. You've left the system, you've established the residency, but now you've got to get paid, and where do you keep and spend that money from? And the answer is Panama. If any of you are using fintechs as like your primary banks, don't. Fintechs are great. They have their place. Something like Wise or Revolut, they're really good at moving between currencies and sort of transferring, wiring money. But these accounts are notorious for freezing your funds.
What about Europe? What if people, for whatever reason, they prefer Europe?
The problem with Europe is not the friendliest place to go to escape taxes. There are some countries that have special tax regimes, but more and more they're sort of phasing those out. For tax optimization, it's not Europe. Europe's for lifestyle. But the cool thing is, like, if you do what I'm saying and you get a Paraguay tax residence, you can go spend your summers in Europe. The rest of the year pretty much sucks anyways because the weather's not good. So, come spend the summers in the Mediterranean. You can work the remote job, go to Asia, just travel around, and it's really the best of both worlds. And then you're not subject to the crazy European taxes.
Right now, I would say this is not well known. This is very niche knowledge. But the more people realize, like, wait a minute, like, we can just get a residency where we don't have to live in the country. It helps us pay zero taxes. At some point, Paraguay is just going to close the gates. Like, it's too much, at least, people doing this.
It's what happens with all the countries. So years ago, I got Panama residency, and then Panama made it much difficult. The same thing happened in Dubai. Dubai was zero tax. Now it's 9% in most cases. Now you have to spend 3-4 months there. Uruguay was the same thing. It didn't used to have any requirement. Then all of a sudden it was 6 months. So these things change, and also it gets more and more difficult. So like right now, Paraguay is ridiculously easy. You need a birth certificate, you need a criminal cert. That's it. But my guess is, based on what's happened in other countries, it won't stay that easy. So then you get into financial requirements, you get into other things, and just the process becomes a lot more complicated. So waiting might mean you miss out on taking advantage of something like this.
It's one of those things that it's actually true, but it's too good. So eventually it will stop being true if you don't act quickly. You just explain the concepts, the benefits, setting things up. So what is it that you actually do?
I can directly help you with. We actually form the businesses, the LLCs, business structures in other countries, Panama, Hong Kong, so we can sort of maximize for you. And as you grow in your career, maybe you have remote jobs now, you start a business later, we can help you, because as you evolve, the structure you need to maximize, to pay as little tax as possible, and to protect your wealth and assets is going to change. You start with the LLC, and then you maybe go to offshore structures a little bit later, and then eventually you get into things like trusts and foundations. We set up a lot of those, and then combining those structures with the residencies we've talked about and the banking. I specialize in like the whole picture. Whereas so many people in this space, they know one thing. There are other people who are very good at Paraguay residencies, but all they're good at is Paraguay residencies. And just having one piece of the puzzle is not particularly helpful. What you really need is to fill in that whole pie. That's where I really come in, is putting it all together for you and working with you to create a custom plan for your lifestyle, for where you are now and where you're going to go. And I work with people to do that.
I know a lot of you guys are still thinking about getting that second job, but you shouldn't just stay at the second job. You need the third job, the fourth job, and then how to offset your tax structure.
For so many years, it was like this social contract, right? You go to school, you get a job, and you work up the ladder, and you're taken care of. The government and these systems are here to help you, to protect you. And yes, you have to pay taxes, but you get all of this stuff. You get a retirement, you get Social Security, you get medical.
Even high social status. You get high social status even.
Exactly. But what's happened is we no longer live in that world. So these systems no longer work. And really the people who are left thinking, hey, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to have this one job my entire life, and then Social Security is going to be here for me. It's not. And so all of this, whether it's the job stacking, whether it's residencies, tax mitigation, it all sort of works together to move you forward and outside this system, which is clearly broken.